Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, they absolutely did. They absolutely got it right. And this is your host, Tom Navolis, and I am so delighted to be back with you once again. We are just continuing all of our wonderful conversations as I drop things on my markers all over the place here out of my favorite work on the Anti-Federalist papers. We're set up to talk about today, and as I promised you, we would get back to talking about Federalist number 10. But what I wanted to do in talking about Federalist number 10 is I wanted to interject for you just a tad more, or actually interject a tad of that which I have not done yet. I've threatened you with it. Oh, no, I mean I promised you with it, is that of the corresponding Anti-Federalist paper. Boy, it's going to be interesting. There's two corresponding Anti-Federalist papers that I do want to talk about today, and one of them being what was written in March 18, 1788, and it was in the Maryland Gazette and Baltimore Advertisers. That is one of them. And the other one that I want to talk about was on October 8th, 1787. So, my goodness, that's what, almost 6 months apart? I guess if you do the math, maybe you're better at math than I am. That may be only 4 months apart. But anyway, the aside of the math, it's when the message happens. The critical components in that are not, especially in the first one that we're going to talk about in March 18 of 1788, I'm going to start with that one before the other, is that in answering Federalist number 10, and let's look at the date of Federalist number 10 again. Federal number 10 was in November 23 of 1787. So we're kind of jumping around on the dates. I have to say, I almost threw all of this out the door and jumped back into John Knox's appellation. Just kind of as a follow-up from what we have been talking about on good moral governance, the moral philosophy paper written by John Witherspoon, and how all of that fit together in respect to what is good governance, or what was expected, especially from Madison's perspective, all of those other students that sat under Witherspoon. And maybe next week what I'll do is I'll put that whole list of students together who sat under the tutelage and education ideas and philosophies and concepts, perspectives, however you want to associate all those words. Psychology 101. Let's do the word association. I won't do the ink blot test on you, but word association. And, you're just getting into that whole piece of, wait a minute, these folks had some real understanding, again, as I bring to you and will continue to bring to you of what the Reformation truths and principles were from the various people during that era, as well as from the First Great Awakening. Now, I have breaking news for you. I put up on Twitter, as well as something that I did on LinkedIn and commented on LinkedIn, is about this Cory Booker communist. That's what he is. He's a card-carrying communist. Everybody knows that. Anybody with any sense knows that. But what came out yesterday, and again this morning, was this idea that he was going to release a classified email. And here it comes out now, this afternoon, or no, I'm sorry, that was Thursday afternoon. So I'm getting my dates mixed up a little bit here, is that on Thursday afternoon, so I think he came out with his idea of releasing this on Wednesday after the Kavanaugh Wednesday session, but then on Thursday afternoon I saw it come out that Cory hoaxes the media. So his whole, it was a hoax on everybody, that the email that he was releasing was a classified email, and setting himself up as he called him a Spartacus moment. ladies and gentlemen, doing those types of things, you know, you can go through the history of the Senate, and we can sit there and look at what happened later in that early mid 1800s and later into the 1900s, and we can see slime balls like Cory Booker in there very clearly, and to the extent that that is why we saw that in that early 1900 period that the 17th Amendment came into effect because of the slime balls that were there and now continue to be there after the 17th Amendment. And not trying to drill down on the 17th Amendment, but just to cover real quickly something relative and modern in the news that we're going to look at from the purposes of what was in Federalist 10 as well as what is in these two Anti-federalist letters that correspond to the ideas of factions, because that's what we were talking about in Federalist number 10, is how you maintain and you manage and you obviate factions within a national government, and the way that factions and those within the factions will manipulate the people. So the Federalists, being Madison, who understood moral philosophy and understood that there was a necessity of morality for good governance, and then these corresponding Anti-federalist letters, which basically outline the similar, is that for good governance, my friends, it always comes down to what is the morality and virtue of those whom we elect, whether that is in local offices or especially to the national office. So with that, I wanted to just bring that out as a focal point of what we're seeing is all of the years of the democrats, the educators, those in the universities, and many Republicans who are coming out and have come out and have used the commentary that we are a democracy, or they use our democracy, or they're constantly trying to tell us we're a democracy. Whereas we absolutely know, if you listen to this program or you listen to anything on Liberty Works Radio Network, which I am doing this program for today, or any other network that I'm on, is the facts and the reality that we are a constitutional republic, which has its challenges if you don't have a moral and virtuous leadership, to which these Anti-federalist papers address. So one of the things that I wanted to get into, and I'm going to have to read certain sections of this paper. This is a corresponding paper similar to Federalist number 10. Again, it was written in March 18th of 1788, and it is signed by none other than a farmer. Okay. I'm going to take you through, and obviously you have seen that it is on the references, as well as you can see that links here on the YouTube channel. If you go to the YouTube channel, that's Samuel Adams Returns YouTube channel, or if you go to SamuelAdamsReturns.net, you'll find the archive there. So just want to let you know that that's where you, if you haven't gotten it in the promo in your email, sign up for that email so that you can get the promos and you can see the references. Because as you know, I always reference everything that I talk about. So he's getting into this whole thing and talking in the first couple of paragraphs, talking about what was going on with the Confederation, knowing that there was and has been and always will be forms of party relationship and interaction, to which he talks about these two parties, which from its first existence, that being the Confederation, began and have continued their operations. So you had two factions even when that was being formed. And remember, Sam Adams was part of that committee during the time that the Declaration of Independence was being written. He was part of the committee to construct the Articles of Confederation. Now, when we look at this and we try and look at how things develop, we know that there are some of those, and especially in party functionality, that people develop operations in secret. And that when you look at political bodies, that if you have only one political body, it's going to lead to despotism. It's going to lead to that blend of tyranny and the underhandedness that happens within the context of that leadership in a secret environment. So when political parties operate in secret, boy, would we have problems. And so he talks about that one of the major issues that came about within the Articles of Confederation was how to relieve the debt. And there were those who wanted to maintain the Confederation who said that the debt should be distributed out to the states. That was the intent, that it should be distributed out to the states according to the states' capacity and capabilities and population and wealth to be able to take and relieve that debt. Whereas there were those, including Madison, who wanted to see that all come under a nationalized form of government, to which then it would ultimately increase the debt. Wow, think about that one. So he talks about that in those first couple of paragraphs, and he says, you know what, things went into despair because we couldn't figure out how to do that appropriately. So he says, understandably, and that our honor was tarnished and our governments, being those of the states' governments, abused by their servants and best friends who were abused. So in the end, it became a bad word. It became a word of things not yet bad enough to mend. It wasn't bad enough at the moment, but they just kind of were trying to figure out, okay, what's going on. And then he continues to talk about that the great part of the important objects of society were entrusted to this mongrel species of a general government. The sentiment of pushing it forward became a general throughout America, and the late convention met at Philadelphia under the uniform impression, get this, it was the impression, a uniform impression, so it really was not asked of the people, but it was a uniform impression that such was the desire of the constituents to form a new government. But even then, the advantages and disadvantages of a national government operated so strongly, although silently, on each individual that the conflict was nearly equal. So even at that time, we were seeing that under the Articles of Confederation, there were aspects of the Articles that were acting upon the individual. So that becomes extremely interesting in regard to that. But what I wanted to get into, and what I'm going to get into in the next segments around this in particular, is that what we had is that what we saw is that there may have not been advantages or disadvantages of a national government that operated so strongly, although silently, on each individual, that the conflict was nearly equal. I wanted to reiterate that. A third or middle opinion, which always arises in such a case, broke off and took the lead. The National Party assented, pursued steadily their object, which was the Federal Party dropped off. So what real federalism was all about dropped off one by one. And finally, when the Middle Party came to view, the offspring which they had given birth to, in a great measure reared, several of them immediately disowned the child. Such has been the progress of the party, or rather the human mind dispassionately contemplating our separate and relative situation and aiming at that perfect completion of a social happiness and grandeur, which perhaps can be combined only in ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're really looking at, is that can party politics actually take and come up with true strategic operational implementation? I don't know. The farmer was really questioning that. He said maybe it's just, in the imaginations of those that try and bring all of this together, which we saw at the very institution of this new Constitution. So when we come back into this next segment of Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists Got It Right, we'll continue with what a farmer had to say. welcome on back for this next segment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Yes, those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And we're proving that today. We're proving it in the reality of what I'm going to continue on. And we may not get into this other letter that I mentioned to you in the first segment, which I am going to give the reference, because if we don't get to it today, we will get to it next week. And that was the one from October 8th, 1787. And remember, as I noticed, so that was October 8th, 1787. And the one that we're dealing with right now, which we opened with in the first segment, well, we didn't open with it, but it got to it in the first segment, was from March 18th, 1788. And what we're seeing is that the Federalist paper number 10 was on November 23rd, 1787. So if we put those in the order, I think that as we get to it is that Federalist number 10 was an answer to the farmer in October, and now this March is a response to Madison in what he was talking about in November of 87. So with that, let me get back to where we were going, because I think what's really critical in understanding about factions and in understanding about how to manage those factions, that being political parties to which the Anti-federalist is now talking about, is that Madison really, he said people got problems, and that, at some point in time, and again, paraphrasing it all and trying to summarize it, some of the things that Madison was saying is that people will take and be sheeple, and that there will be certain folks that just come to leadership, or they have nefarious ideas. They have all of these, like the Soroses, like the Democrats, like you could start naming a list off of all of the, or Cory Booker, for instance. I mean, and the communists, the socialists, we're seeing all of that out there in our media today. But that just always reminds me of what I have to say, and why we have to look into the mirrors of history, is that Proverbs 1:9 is absolutely clear that there's nothing new under the sun. And if I took you back into the appellation of John Knox, I can guarantee you that the same characteristics, the same human characteristics to which we're going to be talking about here in a moment, are there. And the same functions within a people group are there. You have leaders, you have those that have intent of moral and virtuous actions for the general good and know how to lead people from that moral and virtuous perspective. And then you have those, as Madison talks about, and we're going to talk about just here in a moment, that they have nefarious intent because they're a bunch of power mongers, or, as my dad likes to say, is that they're evil. And they follow after evil. They follow after the devil. Well, that's what John Knox said. That's what we have, from a whole biblical perspective, if we actually want to go through that and go back into even the Old Testament in particular. So anyway, but what we have here is with the farmer, what he was talking about, and as we finished off with, is that the whole idea of what is the progress that a party can have, it's all wrapped into the human mind dispassionately contemplating our separate and relative situation and aiming at that perfect contemplation of social happiness and grandeur. Okay, how do you put that together, Karl Marx? That's what, oh yeah, everybody, we can make it wonderful if we make it equal. Okay, let's stop with that. I'm not going to go down that rat hole. But he finishes that paragraph with, which perhaps can be combined only in ideas, so in the mind of somebody. So he goes on to talk about every description of men entertain, every description of men, every description of a human being entertain the same wishes, excepting perhaps a very few bad men of each. They forever will differ about the mode of accomplishment, and some must be permitted to doubt the practicability. All right. So he goes on to talk about this. As our citizens are now apprised of the progress of parties or political opinions. So parties in so many different ways, if we really render it down, if you're not out there rah, 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 and jumping on the bandwagon, you know what? They're political opinions. And those opinions are what? Those opinions are something that every person has, one way or another. You know, we can go through all the different things about opinions are like, opinions are like, opinions are like. Okay, so you can fill in the blank on what opinions are like. And but that all, again, it comes down to the ideas in your own mind of what opinions are like. So when we look at that they'll differ from that for every mode of accomplishment, and some must be permitted to doubt the practicality or practicability of what those ideas are. As our citizens are now apprised of that progress of parties or political opinion on the continent, okay, so they're taking a look at what's out there on the continent. You know, not just looking at what's at home, but what's happening back in Europe in particular. It is fit they should also be informed of the present state, force, and designs of each, in order that they may form their decisions with safety to the public and themselves. This shall be given with all the precision and impartiality that this author is capable of. So what he's doing is he's telling you, even today, that, you know what, we have to look at what was the foundational principles and intent as what we are given, what is practicable. What's happening over there, now that we're seeing it again, is that Europe is all in conflagration. Yes, it is. It's in a massive fire. And then again here, because we have had, through our universities, and instead of teachers, I'm going to call them deceivers. Instead of professors, I'm going to call them deception artiste, if you will, who have led us into the realm of socialism and neo-Marxism, to the extent that we see it in the chambers of Congress in total, and in the bureaucracies in total, to the extent that we have pure socialists and communists that are on the ballots and actually taking place. So his point here is that, boy, we have to take a look at our present situation. What is the state of all of that? Our present state, what's happening in America today, or in that case, what was happening at that time. What forces are at play, as well as what are the designs of each. What are those designs? What will they lead us into? Where are we, and what should we be as a people and as a nation? If we look at it totally outside any theological perspective, which it's interesting, that is the whole thing that, again, John Knox was talking about. You can't look outside of a theological perspective, but within the context of what's happening today, it becomes extremely important that we look at that. So, as we look and say, okay, this author is going to try and help clarify it. So he starts out here now as he gets into the real body of this thing, and he says, America is at present divided. Whoa, whoa. America is divided. So at the time that we're looking at even reviewing this Constitution as presented in '87 by that Congress in Philadelphia, he says we're divided into three classes or descriptions of men. And in a few years, there will be but two. Wow. How predictive is that? You talk about prophetic. That at this point, he was talking about three different classes of people, or three different political party ideas. But he said in a few years there's going to be two. So he goes like this. The first class, and he talks about the first class, comprehends all those men of fortune and reputation who stepped forward in the late revolution, from opposition to the administration rather than the government of Great Britain. Isn't that amazing? And ladies and gentlemen, we're getting close to the last 5 minutes. Here we are, last 5 minutes of the second segment, and we're barely through the 4 pages that I have here of what was in this Anti-Federalist paper. So I guess we're going to have to continue as we get into the next one. But this was very important because if you remember, there were many, many people that were talking about reconciliation at the time of the Revolution. They said, you know what? Even John Adams conceded that the British Constitution was one of the best forms of government available, but the way that it was put into administration was very, very problematic in what happened. And Sam Adams at that time was only, very few, with Franklin and a couple others, that said, no, we need to break away and go do something different altogether. So he continues on, all those aristocrats whose pride disdains equal law, whoa, isn't that interesting? Many men of very large fortune who entertain real or imaginary fears for the security of property. Those young men who have sacrificed their time and their talents to public service without any prospect of an adequate pecuniary or honorary reward, all your people of fashion and pleasure who are corrupted by the dissipation of the French, English, and even the American armies, and a love of European manners and luxury. I have to stop there because he puts a period there. So within these last 3 minutes, let me give a commentary to all of that. So if we really take a look at this first party and class of people that he's talking about, that hasn't changed. Human nature doesn't change a whole lot, and to the effect that those that are of high-moneyed interest are always those that will gravitate towards power, will gravitate towards certain assumptions of what a functionary government should look like in their minds. And to the extent that, we see that these people are always looking back to Europe. As a matter of fact, if you take the Hollywood elite, in particular the Hollywood elite, they're always saying, oh yeah, we're going to head back to Europe, we're going to head back to, Canada, which has a very European model of their parliamentary government. So when we take a look at all of that, we begin to wonder, what does it mean in the context of operating in a republic? And in the minds of those people, they don't give a flying rip and hoot about a republic because it impacts their interests. And we can look at that from the segments that we've already had relative to the those technological, the techno-oligarchs, if you will. The oligarchies are always going to gravitate to themselves and look at forms of government that will take and capture the people and suppress the people and continue down that vein. So within this last minute and a half, we look at that, they always look back to that European model one way or another, and that's something that the likes, well, Madison and even the Federalists said, no, we can't go looking back, and Sam Adams in particular said, no way can we look back. We have to have this model that's based on Republican principles. And John Adams actually, when he wrote his great paper on government, you have to look at it, and reviewing the constitutionalism in particular, always went back to what are those principles and truths relative to republicanism with federalism tied together. So what did that mean for all of these 13 independent and now these 50, let's make it look like that, these 50, and there is Texas, these 50 independent republics. And what does it look for these 50 independent republics to come together in a federal format with Republican principles? And that's what we want to drive to in this whole context of what they're talking about. How does that function? And we'll pick it up in this paragraph here of just talking about the first class when Samuel Adams returns and the Anti-federalists, they got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-federalists got it right. And we are, Tom the Bullis, your host. We are here on Liberty Works Radio Network. And Liberty does work for you on this network. Ladies and gentlemen, I had a great privilege the other night of this past week. What is it, Tuesday night, Kath, that I was on Pastor Sanders' program? Yeah, it was Tuesday night. We had our Jug County Tea Party meeting, and we were talking about what we're going to be doing on our September 20th Tea Party meeting. So anybody in Northeast Ohio, you're more than welcome to join us, because we're going to be talking about levies and the unsustainability of levies and the whole fact that the state is lying to you even with levy renewals. But I was on Pastor Sanders' program for 2 hours talking about my newest book right there, that From Covenant to the Present Constitution. And it was just a great conversation. And Pastor Sanders is also on Liberty Works Radio Network. That's one of the networks that he rebroadcasts on. So I'm very honored to be on this network as he is. And so I would ask, go check out the other hosts and hostesses. Check out the live programming during the week and Monday through Friday evenings, and then contribute. The network is here for you. It is all about you, the listener. And with that, we're going to jump right back into, and boy, oh boy, I can't even get past the first one here, is that what we're talking about is this first class of people that the farmer really is talking about in who we are as people in America, and the fact that that first class is really how it drives to a political party or political opinions. Okay, so whether or not these people really were anything significant in a party, they were strong in their opinions and they had great effect. So as and I'm going to try and jump over this, please go and look at the reference that's there and download this PDF and read through it yourself, because we're going to pick up with it and the other Federalist paper, Anti-federalist paper next week. So he talks about even when you're looking at this, a large majority of the mercantile people are in this group. They're ever present, and then there's a very portion of that that's uninformed and consequently dangerous in their interests. So when you're really uninformed, and that's what we have running around, I think Rush Limbaugh calls it, what was he called, the ignorant bunch or whatever it is, the uninformed, low information. Kathy just whispered at me, is the low information voters. When you're uninformed, you're dangerous. So be informed. You're even more dangerous when you're informed, because you know something. You can have influence over the others. Let's see, our old native merchants have been almost universally ruined by the receipt of their debts in paper during the war and the payment in hard money of what they are owed their British correspondents since the peace. Oh boy, those that aren't bankrupt, so he talks about the bankrupt ones. He talks about a number of people that are rashly, as ignorantly, have embarrassed the affairs and laid the blame on the government. So this is where some of the people who also were interested, he was saying, look, people did deals. And boy, don't we see that when Donald Trump is bringing out, when we see that our government did bad trade deals, when the government allowed, because of the way that the treaties were formed, they allowed businesses to do bad trade deals. And also to go out into the international markets in such a way that they moved their businesses, did a lot of different things, made stupid, bad investments. And so where's the easy place to blame it? Right at you. Oh, we the people. Oh, no, that means the government. And when that means the government, what that means is that, oh, that's an easy place to point the fingers. Wait a minute. As Kathy always says, let's see, I got that many fingers pointing. I got 3 others pointing back. They forget about that. They forget about that the three pointing back in reality is the essence of their insanity and their bad efforts. So he kind of talks about that in that paragraph. And that foreign merchants are generally not to be trusted with influence in our government. Ladies and gentlemen, I brought out to you last week how the Chinese are influencing and lobbying like maniacs. And when you have foreign merchants influencing through lobbying efforts our government, here he is right here. Whoa, hold out, Tommy. What's the date? Here, let me see. Let me hold this date up. Let's see if I can bring it into the camera for you. Can you read that, folks? Yes. That does say in bold there, March 18, 1788. And he's talking about there that foreign merchants shouldn't be trusted. Oh my goodness, isn't that very, very interesting? Okay, then he talks about those people that come into the country, perhaps British emissaries, increasing and rejoicing in our political mistakes. There's another one. Let's take and bring the mirrors of history into some focus right in our face right now. Donald Trump is talking about that. President Trump, he nails it specifically when we look at these foreign emissaries that are rejoicing in our political mistakes. Over the years, what we've seen is the Europeans, we've seen the Russians, we've seen even the Mexicans, and mostly the Chinese have taken and just been laughing, just laughing at us because of the weakness that we have had since the Reagan Revolution, the weakness we have. The Bushes were, I'm sorry, never on my favorites list. The Clinton, he was a disaster. And then the Manchurian candidate, Obama, the worst of all, allowed for these foreign entities to be laughing at us. I'm sorry, I say all of that because it was predicted. It was predicted right here. And holy smokes, they said, even those who have settled among us with an intention to fix themselves and their posterity in our soil have brought with them more foreign prejudice than wealth. Okay, we can talk about that in two different ways. One of the ways is that I look at that from the perspective of the evil, in particular, of Soros and his family being allowed in this country and doing the things that they have done. And you can look at the academics that have come into this country and brought with them their garbage and institutionalized their garbage to the extent, their ideologies, to the extent that it's right here. Oh, let's see. Yes, they fixed themselves and their posterity in our soil and have brought with them more foreign prejudices than any wealth. Okay, time must elapse before the mercantile interest will be so organized as to govern themselves. Okay, you got to relook at what happens. We're re-seeing what has to happen with our mercantile interest right now, and how it comes out with their prosperity. Fortunately, under Donald Trump, that prosperity is moving along quickly. We're reestablishing that. And lastly, in finishing all about this first class, I suppose we may ultimately add the Tory interest. I talk about the Tories very often, and I don't know that you catch that or not. So he's talking about the Tory interest, with the exception of very many respectable characters who reflect with a gratification mixed with disdain that those principles are now become fashionable for which they have been persecuted and hunted down, which, although by no means so formidable as is generally imagined, is still considerable. So that whole idea of what the Tories are all about, you got to take that into consideration because we have a lot of modern Tories. They are present wavering. They are generally, though with very many exceptions, openly for the proposed, but secretly against any American government. Okay? A burnt child dreads the fire. So that's why the Tories at that time were saying, yeah, okay, we're here. You know, you guys have done all of this, and we've seen, you know, what you're doing, so on and so forth. But you know what? We don't want anything to do with the American government. So we have that with so many people and so many of the major moneyed families. Sorry, I don't, you know, I'm not against wealth. I am very much a, how would I say that, a Reformation capitalist. And that's a whole different tenet to discuss. But the real point of that being is that, you know what? I love this one. A burnt child dreads the fire. So, how do you make government work? So he continues on, but should they see any fair prospect of confusion arise, these gentry will be off at any moment for these 5 and 20 years to come. So you figure we're going to have to go back. And I talk about that in the seminar, and I talk about it in the book, is that what happened in the first 25 years after we implemented the Constitution. Ultimately, should the administration promise stability to the new government, they may be counted on as really standards within the power, but ready to efface all suspicions by the violence of their zeal. In general, all these various people would prefer a government as nearly copied after that of Great Britain. And I said bitten, and I do mean that. When I say Great Britain, it did get bitten. Look what's happened now. As our circumstances would permit. Some would strain these circumstances. Oh boy, put a whole strain to it. That's what we have going on, but by socialists and communists instead, neo-Marxists. Others still retain a deep-rooted jealousy of the executive branch and strong Republican prejudices, as they are called. Finally, this class contains more aggregate wisdom and more moral virtue than both of the other two classes combined. It commands nearly two-thirds of the property and almost one-half of the numbers of America, and has at present become almost irresistible from the name of the truly great and amenable man, being Washington, who it has been said is disposed to patronize it, and from the influence which it has over the second class. This first class is nearly at the height of their power. They must decline or moderate, or another revolution will ensue. For the opinion of America is becoming daily more unfavorable to those radical changes which high-toned government requires. The conflict would terminate in the destruction of this class or the liberties of their country. May the guardian angel of America prevent both. Ladies and gentlemen, so when we look into this and we look at this first class, ultimately what this farmer was writing about and this description of this first class, and we're going to get into next week, and we're going to have to look at the other two classes, but what he was finishing with, and it's very important because that's where we are today, is that it's either the swamp is going to take and continue, and that's where I think he's talking about this first class of people as the swamp, or as we have seen that those of that European neo-Marxist socialist nature where so many people are looking to today are going to come to the head of things. Either or, those that are in the swamp or those that are moneyed, as we see with the Hollywood elite, we see with the Soroses, and so many others that, you know, want it all for them, and then let's make it equal for everybody else, which it never is. You know, it's going to end on one of two things. It's either going to end in they have to be reduced to nothingness, which I think Donald Trump is making a great effort at, and he needs our help. So get engaged as we press into this election cycle, and otherwise there's going to be conflict. It'll turn into another revolution and the destruction of that class totally, and possibly the liberties of our country. And I can only pray the same thing and ask you to do that as well, is that may the guardian angel of America prevent it. And so, ladies and gentlemen, come on back next week and we jump back into what is happening from the anti-federalist perspective in what prompted Federalist number 10. See you next week. Thanks a lot.